All right, it is that time of day again for me to stream Odinmade Hero, the stream where we learn from Casey Muratori how to make a game from scratch, but instead of using C and C++, we're using the Odin programming language. And yesterday, whoa, YouTube is freaking out. You gonna let me know that the stream is okay? Are we streaming? Sometimes YouTube doesn't want to put the stream in the live tab. Sometimes it puts it in the home tab. Sometimes it puts it in the live tab. And so I have to check both to see that I'm live somewhere on YouTube to make sure it's not broken. But anyway, yesterday we were working on continuing to expand on this idea of having entities that live at different frequencies based on their proximity to the camera or the player character. I guess it's kind of both. The player, it's more to the camera right now, but if we decided we wanted the camera to follow the player explicitly and make it, completely smooth scrolling, then it would be both the camera and the player. So it's just kind of relative, I guess. But I thought we had maybe had a bug that Casey also had, but I thought maybe he would fix it, in the Q&A yesterday, and he did not. And I kind of skimmed ahead today, and I looked and saw that he is still dealing with this bug for this entire day until I think towards the end. I think towards the end we're going to get an answer, and even he is a little bit surprised by it, if I remember right. So this bug is related to all this camera business, right? Because that's what we're talking about. We're modifying entities to be dormant if they fall out of range of the camera's apron, where the camera is following based on where the player moves, right? We're kind of fixed, or did we turn that back off or on? I can't remember if that's yeah. So right now we have this code enabled, which means that the camera is affixed to a certain room with all the tiles, and we've got some walls around that room. But if the player leaves, the camera will change. So it is relative to the camera, but the camera is dependent. Where the camera is pointing depends on the player. And the point of all of that is that, let's go back into here. We should be seeing, as the player leaves the room, and therefore the camera follows him, and those entities that were now within range of the camera's apron inside of it now fall out of range of it. They get made dormant, right? Down here, when we bring them into active, so the entities that are now within range, and they should be, this wall that's within range of where the camera is, should be brought into a high frequency as soon as we start up, because we set the camera after we've added those walls, but you can see here that they're still dormant. And I wanted to try and chase this down and see if I could kind of predict an explanation for this going into today's stream, but I just didn't have the time. And if we go here, right? So when we first add it, it's dormant, and I wonder if I just made it active, if they would just immediately pop in, right? Oh, the camera is pointing in the wrong place. That's the issue. Or not. Well, I have no idea why that is so wrong. That doesn't make sense to me. So clearly my understanding is not as good as it should be with respect to what's going on here. Because you can see if I add those walls as dormant, then everything works fine once we spawn in the player. So there's a couple things going on here, and I wish I had more time to sort of dig into it. And maybe I will over the weekend, since I haven't been doing the stream on weekends. But we'll see if I actually have time this weekend, because we've got to build a new crib, which just arrived. So let's go ahead and let Casey kick it off. I'm going to try and burn through today as fast as I can, because we're going to go downtown for some Halloween festivities here in a few hours. And it's a pretty code-heavy day, so I don't want to get too sidetracked on random stuff, as random stuff is wont to get us distracted. I go where my curiosity takes me a lot of the time on stream, and that means that I don't move as fast as I would like to, but at the same time, I feel like the whole point is to explore curiosity and just see what kind of learning falls out of following that curiosity. So here we go.
Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to Handmade Hero, the show where we code an entire game live. It will be scaled properly, but we don't.
Well, that was not what should have happened. Thanks, YouTube.
Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to Handmade Hero, the show where we code an entire game live on Twitch from scratch, no libraries, no engine. And basically, you know what? Honestly, it's pretty much going to be awesome. Like, I mean, that's all we really need to say. I'm already starting to get that feeling that this game is going to be awesome. And so there's really not much more to say. Let's just start, because we were doing a bunch of cool stuff yesterday, and now is the time when we can sort of finish up a bunch of things I think that we had started down the road to doing. Well, I don't know if we'll finish up, but we'll do some kind of interesting other things that I've been wanting to do for a while. And so I don't even want to take too much time to preamble this. I just want to get going. It's programming time. I ate like half a bag of chocolate chip cookies before the stream, which is not a good idea, so I'm a little bit wired right now, and that's fine. But anyway, if you have pre-ordered the game on handmadehero.org, you should have gotten a link in your email. And that link has a zip file you can download with all the source code in it. What you want to do is download the source code for day 53, because we're on day 54, and so you unzip the previous day's source code and you can code right along with me. So if you're doing that, do that. Now is the time to do that. All right, so if I remember correctly, we'd just gotten to the point where we'd put little entities in the world to represent all the walls. So basically now the entities, we made these little yellow entities there that are all around the side. Those are all the walls, and we now have a situation where, excuse me, where we haven't actually quite finished doing or figuring out exactly how we're doing our sort of like a two-level and two-tier entity system, right? We have entities that are sort of in the field of view, sort of active entities that we want to consider at high frequency and to do like full gameplay on. And then we also have entities that are further away from the camera that you can't see and that aren't in the immediate vicinity of the player. And we want to allow those to run at a low frequency so that we can still simulate them and have rich interactions going on elsewhere in the world potentially that the player could experience the effects of later when they go there, but that aren't going to suck down a ton of CPU time if we want to scale the entity count up to really high numbers, 10, 100,000, who knows how many. So what we need to do is kind of continue down on that path. It's kind of fun to see him bounce up and down for some reason. So what we want to do is continue down that path, and also put in, we have currently no spatial partition or anything like that. So also collision detection right now is extremely inefficient because we're colliding against all the high-res entities all the time. So even the ones that are like off-screen we're colliding against. So we need to start paring this down and making this, letting this coalesce into like a nice good system now that we sort of started on that path. And it is a little bit taxing for me to do, unfortunately, because it's weird to do this in like 1 hour chunks like this. But I've been trying to keep it mostly in my head. I page it out during the day when I'm working on other code, and then I try to page it back in now. So we'll see. Hopefully I won't make too many mistakes. So anyway, what we sort of started doing here is we sort of started making it so that as the camera moved, we had the set camera call. And what the set camera call would do is first it would go ahead and it would map out. So it would change the entity residence of any entities which were sort of we're currently in the high frequency set and no longer need to be simulated at high frequency. And then we would go ahead and go through all the entities that were in the like outside of the high frequency set and might need to come back in. And one of the things that I was saying yesterday, and I think is probably true, just I'm looking at how this is going and whether I want to deal with it or not. And you'll notice that we still have never come up with a real good idea of what would even be in a low entity, because we had dormant, low, and high. And really everything ends up in the dormant or the high entity for the most part. So really the only things that would kind of be in the low entity that I can think of are like movement timers or something. I mean, like the difference between a dormant entity and a low entity is just whether or not they would get ticked periodically on that sort of periodic update. So I'm kind of thinking that maybe we just have low frequency and high frequency entities. That's what I've been thinking. Because I don't want to overcomplicate something for no real benefit. So maybe we still would have the concept of a dormant entity, which is a low entity that doesn't really ever need to be ticked. But maybe we just don't ever have that, and that's fine too. I don't know. It's really hard to say. So I think what I'm going to say is let's just go ahead and make that change. Let's just go ahead and say that we just have low entities and high entities, and we don't have that third tier, just to simplify things because I haven't seen the need for it so far.
So maybe I just internalized this because I've seen him work through this code before when I was doing this project in Zig. And I bring this up all the time, which feels tedious and redundant, but at the same time, I'm like reflecting on that past experience and trying to gain some kind of deeper understanding from it now in the present, right? So him articulating that out loud was something I was kind of waiting for him to vocalize it because I knew he was going to vocalize it at some point, but I was trying to understand the rationale before just looking up the answer, right, and hearing him say it again. Like instead of waiting for that information to come from me. And this is something that's come up multiple times over the past couple days. Like I was trying to think really hard about why you would have 3 tiers, and you know, because he can't think of a reason, I'm trying to think outside of, you know, why you might actually want to have that. And it would have to be pretty specific, I would think. But maybe there would be an obvious answer. You'd only know that if you had set out to do that specific thing, right? And you were like, oh, okay, this is why you'd have entities that are kind of operating. And like the thing that, so somebody suggested to him in a Q&A to use either hot, cold, or frozen instead of high, low, and dormant. And that sort of terminology comes out of, I think, at least in my world, I relate it to like tiers of storage in the cloud, right? For something like S3 or something like that, where you've got like stuff that's ready instantaneously, stuff that's ready within minutes to read, and stuff that's, you know, it might take a few hours actually to come off of like frozen, right? So that would be like the 3 tiers, and you would have specific use cases for each of those that you would only want to use whichever one you know for a fact applies, rather than just, you know, using whatever haphazardly, right? Like I've never had to think that hard about it because a use case has just never come up for me. So it's kind of like one of those things where it's like, and I do this with languages more than I do it with tech, where it's like I see a feature. We just talked about this yesterday, right? With enumerated arrays. Like I find out about this thing and I finally start to understand it, and then now I'm like looking for all of the places to use it, and that's not necessarily how you want to do things, right? It's like a habit that I didn't realize I still had until I went and started learning new languages again, right? Because I hadn't tried really hard to learn a new language for like 5+ years before starting to learn Zig and then Odin. So anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and do what he just did, and we'll get rid of that dormant notion in the, where was that? Wasn't there an enum for entity residence? Or maybe not. Maybe there never was. We have one for the entity's type, but oh no, here we go. There it is. I just couldn't see it because I couldn't see enough of my code. So we get rid of that. And then all the stuff in here is going to go into the low entity type. Then we get rid of that. And then wherever else we're using this, we just get rid of that. So all those dormant entities on the game state go away. This is going to become low. I'll just jump ahead because this is not something that I should... If I screw this up, then shame on me. You know, because this shouldn't be anything other than just a bunch of find and replace sort of changes. So anything that was being grabbed as dormant just becomes low. And in fact, we'll just do this wherever we see it. And then this is going to be like this, I think. Right? That goes away. Do we have dormant anywhere else? We do over here, but I don't think we're going to bring this code back, unless I'm mistaken. And this gets changed over. That as well. That. See, it's just not... There's no way I can screw this up, right? But we'll see. As I say that, surely there is something that I have not thought about that is going to blow this up. I gotta like reverse jinx myself somehow and say it. Oh, you're definitely gonna screw this up. Okay, I don't see dormant, the dormant type anywhere, or the dormant enum anywhere. The dormant enum value for residence anywhere. So it looks like we've just got all of these dormant accesses that we gotta change. So that actually can go away, and we can uncomment this. Aha! I saved myself some effort by not just deleting that line before. That changes all to that. That looks good. I could just find and replace. I could just sub the whole file out, right? But I want to look and make sure. Like if I do this, right, that doesn't. Now I'm just doing this assignment twice where I don't need to. So I just want to make sure I'm looking at all the changes I'm making. That can just be swapped to that. All of that can change. And same thing there. Same thing there. And we might be good to go here. Let's see if we build. And then if we run, if it'll all blow up on our faces. But looks good so far. Can we spawn in? We can. And there you go. Can I spawn in 2 guys? Come on, controller, you can do it. Oh, it's because I don't have... this is something I need to do in the platform layer. I don't have anything set up, I don't think, to detect a new controller being plugged in. And I don't even know if this would be handled necessarily in here. Do I have a to-do for this somewhere? Just a bunch of stuff for logging. We already did this, so actually I can get rid of that. Explore using arenas, blah, blah, blah. We did that. So get rid of that. Yeah. So I don't think I have anything in here for detecting controllers being plugged in, but I think Casey's code works that way. So that's just something I'll just add it in here. Detects when controllers are plugged in or disconnected while the game is running. Because I remember seeing that what I had done with STL wouldn't handle that. And at the time I was too impatient. I didn't want to deal with it, so I just kind of went full speed ahead. So that looks good. If I disconnect this, I don't think it's going to break anything, but like we should want to do something. We should respond somehow when the controller is disconnected, and when it gets plugged back in, that doesn't get handled gracefully, because now this guy is just dead here. He can't be controlled even if I move this around. So that's definitely something that I want to spend some time on figuring out. So all right, cool. Well, nothing broke. Hey there, Nutella. Hey, Devil. You got a Stromboli? Help me out here. What is a Stromboli? Remind me. Like, I know I've seen this word before, but yeah, it's some kind of Italian, basically a pizza roll. Good for you. That sounds nice. I should have eaten something before I started the stream, but I was in a hurry, and so I'm gonna go hungry here. I do be coding, Nutella. I do be coding. Lots of coding. I got very big code, believe me.
So I'll let that need reemerge if it turns out to be true, but if it doesn't, then we'll just count ourselves lucky that we've got one less thing to deal with, and that's that. So let's go ahead and remove those dormant entities entirely, right? And I guess I'm going to replace dormant everywhere that I see it with low, right? So that's all I've got now. So I can go through and do all of these. And then there's some places where we have dormant entity stuff that just goes away entirely, like here where we've got 2 of those. And the compiler should tell us about that just fine, I think. Yeah. So I've got rid of low entities, and so now they're gone. And I think things should probably still work roughly the same as they did, and they do, so that's good. No problems there. There we go. And so now let's think about this a little bit more carefully. So I've got ways of adding entities now that are in here. And one thing that's interesting about adding entities is I think, technically, entities probably should always be added in the low state and then get moved to high, because most entities are always in the low state. Like, when the whole world gets generated, everything will be in the low state, right? Nothing be in the high state. So really, that high state is just for a limited number of things that are just right around, that are just right around the cursor, or right around the player, right? And so typically we would expect to have lots and lots of low entities and not very many high entities, right? So the next thing that I think might be a good thing to do is to start thinking about it in those terms, where instead of having, like, I did this thing and I thought that was kind of clever, but the thing that I was thinking of is, I wonder if it maybe makes more sense to already, even now, start to partition into high and low entity sets that aren't mirrored. So, something that looks more like this, where we start to say that the low entities and the high entities don't map to each other. Like, they're not one-to-one correspondences. There's a ton of low entities, and there's only a subset of those that are actually in the high set at any given time, right? And furthermore, one thing we could do, and I don't know, like, I'm just throwing this out there. One thing that we could do that's kind of amusing is we could think of a high entity set as basically consisting of some fixed number of entities. Like, we could say that there are always 256 entities simulated at high resolution or something, or always 64 entities simulated at high, I don't know, right? we could say that, and then the entities that are in that set are just however many entities, whatever the 256 closest entities are, right? So as you move around, it's just always keeping the entities sorted by whoever's close to the players in that set. I don't know if that's actually something I want to do, but I just thought I'd throw it out there as something I was kind of thinking about. It's like, oh, that's kind of interesting. That way we have like a bounded set, and we know that's always what we're simulating in terms of a fixed kind of thing there. Anyway, so yeah, so if we did it this way, then what I was thinking of doing is, so the entity residence would go away, right? And what would happen is something like the low entity structure would just have a writer on it that basically said, where is the high entity, right? What's the high entity index? And that high entity index would tell you if it was 0, it means that this guy isn't in the high entity set. And if the high entity index was set to something, then it would tell you that the high entity was, in fact, present, right? And symmetrically, I could do it where you've got the high entity has a pointer back to its low entity as well. Now, I don't actually know if both of those things are necessary. It may be that we could make it so that that was not necessary. But it's just kind of an interesting thing to think about. So that way we would just go, we'd look up our low entities when we need to move them to high. We just do that and record the fact that they're in there. And in the high entity set, when we're spinning over them, we grab the low entity that we want. If we actually need it, we grab that low entity out of the pool by doing just a dereference, right? So that's something to think about. Another thing that we could think about doing is that the high entity could just include the low entity in it just straight up. So in other words, we would copy the low entity data out into the high entity. But there's reasons why I think that could be dangerous. And that's because we're going to have people who simulate primarily on low entity, and I want them to kind of try and stay in sync. So I think for now, I want to go with the forward back pointer thing that just links them up. And then as we see how the patterns emerge, and when we start getting into more like performance-oriented things, and we start to maybe care a little bit about whether that's a little too much to have these like references going everywhere and pulling randomly out of things, the random memory accessing patterns, then we can start to think about it, whether we need to do something different. So yeah, so there you go. So what I want to do now is say, okay, so let's go ahead and do that. Let's create things only in the low entity list, and let's start treating the high entity list a little bit more specifically, right? And so we've got this high entity list here, and we'll have a high entity count and a low entity count, basically, so that we basically, we kind of have two different ones. And I'm putting an underscore after this temporarily because I want to see everywhere that's used, and I want to think about it a little bit. And so now what we can do is we can say, all right, when we want to change an entity's residence, right, then really when we're changing its residence, I'm trying to think if we ever actually need this function again, or whether we want this to be more a make high and a make low, because we'll always know which one of those two things we're doing, if that makes sense. Let's take a look. Change entity residence. So get entity actually does have it parameterized there. Here, there. So those are, yeah. So I'm thinking that we probably want this to kind of change up a little bit, right? I'm thinking that we kind of want this just to be a make high and a make low. So basically, like there's something that moves a low to a high, and there's one that gets rid of the high, right? And you never really have to move the high back. Right, because I think that that would always sort of just automatically happen, because I think we said that we always keep that low state updated anyway. So really all we have here is we have a like move or move it, but make entity high frequency or something, and we'll get rid of this for now, right? And we also don't really need this anymore for the most part.
I don't have a problem with high and low, but I think I like active and dormant better as like a naming scheme for this, because if I see active, I'm just gonna come to that conclusion in my head. Like it's just a little bit more terse, but it's still informative enough for me. I don't know. We'll stick with this for now, but I might branch off there and do my own thing, which is always dangerous, but sometimes you got to be a little bit risky.
Because we know that you always have a low, and so if you got a bundle, you just check to see if high is not null. That's the only thing you would have to check for, right? So if I want to do make entity high frequency, I'm going to say which entity it is that I want. That's an index, obviously, into the low, so I guess we should start to call these low index, and that's probably something that I might want to start actually having a type for. Hard to say, but like an entity index type, just so people don't, people being me, don't make mistakes passing the wrong kind of index, right? So let's keep an eye on that, and if I do make that mistake, that would be a good indication that it's a good time to do that, right? I like how we still have implement this here, even though we already implemented it. Like I said, comments always fail. So all right, so if we want to do this, we want to make an entity high frequency. What we need to do first is we need to go ahead and pull its low entity, right? So we grab its low index out like that. And then we need to check to see whether its high entity index is actually 0. Because if its high entity index isn't 0, that means it's already got a high entity and we don't care, right? So if we need to move the guy to high, then what we need to do is first assert that there's room for him in the high table, right? And if there isn't room for him in the high table, he can't move. And so one of the things interesting about that, actually, I guess we could also say, we could also go ahead and just make sure that that's always true. So that that's not true, we'll assert it as an invalid code path, right? And I don't know if we actually ever defined one of those. Handmade platform.h. Is there assertions in here? Yes, there are. But we don't have them. So I'm going to go ahead and...
So got a bit of a different naming here. I'm just gonna stick with his naming scheme so I don't confuse myself. So entity low. I almost just want to say low because I mean I know I'm dealing with an entity here, so maybe I'll just do that. And then so it looks like he's gonna assert something here, so I'll just drop that in. And I don't want to assume anything here. So I won't even speculate as to what is going on. I just want to make sure I stay caught up because he is moving pretty fast, and if I wait too long for some kind of understanding to happen, I'll have a whole lot of catching up to do. So he's going to say invalid code path here, which is basically like a panic is what we want, I think. And then, you know, we're going to pass some kind of message here that says that we did a bad thing, which basically means that, well, if we're trying to make an entity that's low or an entity that's dormant into an active entity, then if that dormant entity does not have a high entity index, then something's gone terribly wrong, right? I think is the idea.
Define that. Define invalid code path. And invalid code path is just something.
Is this right? Or should it just be panic? I think I did this because I think this is what Zig does, right? For its built-ins. I think if I just do that, that was weird. Bit of a Zigism just kind of crept in there. Rock stars don't become famous by being mainstream. You know what? You are absolutely right, and you just get me. That's why you're here. You just get me. Okay, so yeah, we'll just throw that in. It can panic with no message right now because he's about to write it in.
That I like to do, which is essentially an assertion that I stick that always asserts in some place that I never expect the code to actually get in practice, but which theoretically could happen, and that I don't want to create a bug at runtime, right? And so one example of this is that technically our game might not do all the things that it's supposed to do if we try to make an entity high frequency, but it's not able to because we run out of room in our high frequency table. But technically we shouldn't just straight up crash, right? Like why not make it so that we just keep running, but everything's at low frequency instead, right? Seems fine. So I would say, all right, we've got our entity high, we've got our entity low, whatever that high index is. So at this point, if whatever that high entity count is, if the game state high entity count is less than whatever the array count is of the high entities, right? Then we're going to go ahead and say that it's okay to add it, right? And so now the high index is going to be equal to whatever the entity count was, incremented, so that we know the next one. You know, we're just taking a slot in our high entity thing, and then we'll go ahead and grab out that high, and then the rest of the function can proceed as normal, right? So all we did is just push someone on the top of that high entity array, right? So that's.
I guess I should just check if this is greater than 0, is what he's really doing there. I hate to assume, but I'm pretty sure. Because we've done something similar to this elsewhere, but Odin won't let me just evaluate 0 to be falsy, right? Like we have to make it a little bit more explicit, which I'm fine with. I don't know. Something like this, I don't think I can make this nil. Right? I think it has to be a pointer to be nil. And so it almost makes me want to try using an optional, but this is probably fine. And I don't think it's worth... I might think about that a little bit more and try it off stream. And then it would be like, you know, whatever that syntax is. Like if there's an int in there, then go ahead and do the thing. The syntax is probably wrong, but yeah, I don't know. It just seems like there might be a slightly more expressive way than this, than checking to see if it's greater than 0, to see if it's, you know, present or not. But shouldn't get too hung up on that right now.
It's all good. Now we're gonna map this guy into the camera space, and again.
I see. So he doesn't need to assert because that's what this is for. So instead of asserting and like having the thing crash in that way, well, yeah. I guess I don't really, I can't appreciate the difference. It's not readily apparent to me why we would want to panic here instead of just asserting that this is true. Some more stuff to think about, I guess.
And also, another thing here is it's important to point out. So this number pretty much has to be fixed. So this is not really a case where, like a lot of times we talk about garbage collection and automatic memory management is bad, is good, all these other sorts of things. This is actually not what I'm worried about here. So this is not, the fact that I need this high entities thing to be a fixed size has nothing to do with memory management actually. It does happen to be nice because it means that our memory management will be fixed, and that's fine, but that's not actually why I'm doing it. The reason I'm doing it this way is because high entities are the performance cost, and so I know that I'm basically going to have a certain budget for high entities, right? I know that however many I can afford, and we'll find out what that is later, but however many I can afford is limited by the CPU time per frame I have to process them. So I can't just make this an unbounded array that grows. It has to actually be limited in a realistic way. So when we start talking about memory management, those sorts of things, we're really going to be focusing more on this array, which is going to hold lots of guys potentially, not this array, which is going to be limited to a small number of guys, which is 2d6, 512, something. Who knows how many guys, but however many we can successfully process at speed for whatever it is that we need to do. Okay, so we grab out the next high entity that we need there, and we do the same stuff that we used to do on it, which I think is fine. And now after we set all this stuff up, we can record the fact on the entity low, the fact that it has a high entity index, right? Which is that. So that's the thing for moving us into the high frequency space. And then if I want to do the opposite, like make entity low frequency, then I've got two choices. And this is largely, I guess this is really just about performance. I don't actually know that there's any other thing that would matter here about whether I do a free list or not, but you can see, I think I'm going to do it this way. We'll see how it goes. So what? Oops, there's not going to be an if there. And also, I guess now that I think about it, this is wrong. It's okay if it's already got a high. So it's only that I wanted to insert a invalid code path on, right? That.
Okay, so I think I was just misunderstanding what this check was then. Basically, okay, yeah. If we are trying to make an entity high frequency and it already is, that's the check. And he probably already said that and I just didn't catch it, right? But that makes a ton of sense that we'd want to not create a duplicate entity out of a low entity, a duplicate active one out of a dormant one. I'm going to keep using that terminology and it'll probably just convince me to go with that naming scheme. But then again, high and low is just more terse, actually, if you're not using the frequency, descriptor. So maybe it's fine. So yeah, this gets its own conditional, right? Like that. And so at this point, I guess we're gonna just not do anything if the entity is already high. So just don't do anything. Silently do nothing. But this here says, okay, yeah, so that's just what he said. I guess I'm just repeating it to make sure I understand what's going on here. We'll do nothing if the low entity is already high frequency. But if it's not, and we're trying to make a low entity high frequency, but we have no more room, then we panic. And maybe this could be a more descriptive panic, right? We say, ran out of high entity storage, and then that kind of makes it more explicit what has happened. And you could see that by just looking at the code and remembering, oh, but like, what if I had never written this? What if it's been years since I wrote this and somehow I caused this panic to happen?
That's like, I guess I didn't
start with this. So this will be the same but in reverse. I'll just do this here. Copy that in. Drop it here. And we will see where this goes.
The high, if it already has a high, that's totally fine. That just means someone wanted to make something high frequency that was already high frequency, which is really not an invalid code path. That's probably something we'll just allow so that people don't have to check first. They can just say, I need this guy to be high frequency, and it will be. So we really only wanted to assert if we ran out of room so that we know, because we want to try and make our game so that we always do use the right number of high entities. So that's really what that's about. All right, so that is that, and let's make sure that that compiles okay here. Let's see. Okay. So then when we make someone low frequency, we're going to do the opposite of what we just did, assuming that the guy. Oh, and that's backwards again. Yeah, it's if he doesn't have high entities. Yeah, a little slow today. A little bit slow. All right, so assuming that the...
Just keep thinking about this more, and it's like what this is doing is just continuing to make this. I see this all the time now. The more I use Odin and the more I read about other people using Odin and what their experience with the language is like, and if they've been using it for a long time, like what they recommend. This is just making the zero value useful, right? And if you internalize why the zero value can be useful to mean to kind of represent nothing, then it doesn't really need to be any more expressive than that. So I think it might just be something that I have to work to change. The more I expose myself to that and think about it that way, the more this just makes the more sense. But, so he just changed it to not, right? So this would be equals 0, right? Because we don't have one. Yes, okay. Yeah, because we before, and I think I said it out loud correctly, but I wrote this wrong. Because this would do nothing if we did already have one, which is, you know, antagonistic to panicking if we're trying to make one and we already have one. So this would, it would always panic in this case. So I think we want to check if it's equal to 0. Okay. That feels good. This is like a case where I've seen that so many times, you know, make the 0 value useful. And it's been useful in many other places, right? Because everything is 0 initialized with Odin, and then that means that if I want to start throwing assignments onto a zeroed out entity, then I know, like, if I've just allocated it and I haven't done anything else with it, that I don't have to explicitly zero it out. But this is like a different thing almost. I mean, and it's partially because we're not just operating on the low here. We're doing stuff with these other, you know, with the concept of both a high and a low entity. So that's a pretty useful instance of seeing that. And the more I look at it and think about it, the more I like it.
The guy does have a high index in this case. Then I need to pull him off of that list, so he shouldn't be on the high anymore. And so what I need to do first is say, and I could pull this out here to high index, right? So if the high index is at the end of the array, then I don't have to worry about it. So if the high index is is equal to however many entities there already were in that high entity list, right? High entity count. So it would be equal to that, I should say, -1, right? So if the high index equals the count -1, then all I have to do is just decrement the count, right? Because it was the last one, so I just decrement it. But if it wasn't the last one, then I have to move it into, I have to basically fill the gap that's going to be left by closing that hole, right? So if you imagine we just have an array here, right?
We'll check out the blackboard here in a second, but I just want to make sure I'm following this on the train of thought that I'm already on. So if we are equal to the high entity count -1. Okay, so it's just a way of maybe making that calculation much simpler, right? Because we're at the end. Whoops, this should be this. What am I doing? There's no len call necessary here. So if we do have a high entity off of this low entity, and it is equal to the count -1, which would mean it's occupying the last element, then we just say that there's one fewer. But over here, this has to look a bit different. I guess we'll see how Casey handles it, because if it's in the middle, right, if it's anywhere else, then we're going to have to delete it, and yeah. I should avoid speculating too much about how this is supposed to look right now, and just let Casey explain it on the blackboard. Because I feel like I'm just going to get it completely wrong, which is fine, but I'm short on time, so I don't want to waste time being completely wrong over and over.
Fill the gap that's going to be left by closing that hole, right? So if you imagine we just have an array here, right? Here are my high entities, right? I've got 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? And then I've got my low entities here, right? And these guys are pointing into this in various ways, although hopefully not to this one because that's illegal. So I've got all of this stuff set up. What I want to do is say, all right, if I'm going to remove this guy, right? So he's going away. I don't want to leave an empty space there. We could decide to do that, which now that I think about it, might actually be the right solution. Just mark it as not there, so that when we're processing through it, yeah, that's probably better, huh? Because you know that we want this to be a constant time processing, so we know that we have to support being able to process everything. Yeah, so why am I even thinking about this? Never mind. I take it all back. I don't have to do that at all. So we're just never gonna decrement that count. I think what I'll probably do is I'll probably just keep a free list. That seems like the most logical thing to do. I don't know. I'm so torn right now. You can see why I'm torn, right? Because we know that we're going to have some budget for processing a certain number of entities, right? And so, you know, let's say we can afford 256 entities. So when we're doing the processing of these, I feel like there's no reason.
Whoops. Yeah. I left myself on mute again. I apologize. I really need to condition myself to stop doing that. But it only happens when I go to take a drink of water, because I don't want to be, you know, splashing on the mic. So, God, I can't even remember what I was saying. Maybe I pointed out at least that maybe all I said was that I would never been able to guess where he was going with this based on what he had started to write. And so it would have been a waste of effort. What was he just saying?
You know, let's say we can afford 256. You can see why I'm torn, right? Because we know that we're going to have some budget for processing a certain number of entities, right? And so, you know, let's say we can afford 256 entities. So when we're doing...
Yeah, so I think that's all I was saying, is that I could have sat here spending 5 minutes thinking about how he was planning, to handle removing that high index. And then he started drawing it out, and he was like, well, we'll just zero it out. And I would not have thought to do that, because that would mean backing off this change. That's all I was saying.
Doing the processing of these,
Look, nobody wants to hear the glug glug. It's not a good thing to hear, at least in my opinion, and so I assume that other people feel the same way. But maybe I'm totally wrong, and that's just, you know, some sick and twisted thing that people want to hear on stream. But I don't think that's the case.
I feel like there's no reason why we shouldn't just skip ones that are marked as done, because we know we could have processed them if they're all filled. So we don't care if we pay the performance penalty of skipping one that's not there in the iteration, because it doesn't matter. We're saying that we had a CPU budget to process them if they were all filled. So it seems like that would be fine. And then all I would do is just keep a free list, which basically points every time you eliminate one of the high entities, you just add it to the free list. And so then when someone wants to take a new slot, it just pulls it off of the free list, right? So that seems like a pretty reasonable way to do it. I don't know why I wouldn't. But then the other thing that I was thinking of doing was saying, okay, when I pull someone off, I'll just take the last guy, whoever's the last guy on the array, and I'll move him to that slot, right? And then just reduce the count by 1. And the reason that's a little less janky, a little more janky, is because it does involve doing the copy here and then setting this guy's, whoever was pointing to this, right? Setting them to point to there. You know, it's like, I don't know, which do you do? They're both fine. And so normally I would do that if I wanted to keep the array compact for processing purposes, but I'm already saying that I need to, that the array is only as big as my processing could handle anyway at maximum. So that's not a concern. So it seems like, yeah, I don't know. I'll keep the array compact for now. Let's just say that we'll keep the array compact for now. I really don't know. That's just what I'm going to do. So assuming that we happen to be removing the last guy, then we're just done right away. Otherwise, we have to do the remapping. So otherwise...
So there you go. Like twice inside of just a couple minutes, he decided, oh, I'm actually not going to do it this way. We'll just zero it out. And then he goes back to the original thinking that he had. And like, if he is having a hard time making that decision, like, I have no hope of knowing which is the more correct one. And maybe there's like a case, maybe you would have, I don't know, like, I guess I just do not have a good appreciation for the performance ramifications in this case to be able to make a conclusion one way or the other. I can't even speculate. It's so far above my head. I just can't do it.
What we have to do is say, well, okay, who is the last guy then, right? We need to basically say whoever is the high entities, right? So whoever is the last one, and this is like, I guess, last index, last high index, right? So if we were going to remove the last high index, then we're done. Otherwise, we're just going to grab whoever that was. So that's a high entity, last entity, right, is this guy. So we'll grab that last entity. We now need to romp him over where the other high entity was, right? And I guess what's one thing that's kind of interesting about this is we might have the high entity index as well when we want to make someone low frequency. So it's kind of a little tough to say which way we should be doing this, whether we should pass the high index here or not. But either way, we'll think about that in a second. So this is kind of our whole, or our deleted entity. This is our deleted entity, right? And so our deleted entity, he is at high entity's high index, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and say that the deleted entity now equals whatever that last entity is, right? And then I'm going to say that whoever was, whichever low entity was pointing to him as his high entity, right? I just need to go ahead and tell him that it's been moved, right? So he has his high entity index, like so, equal to whatever our high index was, right? That is not what I want to do. That is not what I want to do. Low entity index. There we go. So this is basically saying the low entity that the last entity corresponds to. His high entity index now points at where we just where we just filled in the array. And in either case, I guess this always happens. So really, this is just if they're not equal to, meaning if we do have to fill. Now, in either case, excuse me, in either case, that entity low, the entity low's high entity index that's getting romped is always going to revert now to not having it.
Hold on. I totally... Okay. So this is just looking... He's just working through... I totally missed that he played with this conditional. So instead of having this be an if-else... this happens down here. And then this low entity that we are, well, this high entity that we are making low no longer has a high entity, so mark that index as 0. Again, making that 0 value super useful. That's really hammering that point home for me, I think. And then high index, we want to be sure is not equal to the last high index before we do this stuff, because then we'll be messing some stuff up. This needs to be a pointer, right? Because we'd be deleting it. Let me think about this. I just want to make sure that this settles in my brain and we're pretty good on time for the time being. So we get that last entity on the high entity list, and we get the entity that we are, and I guess this should be, yeah, no. So this we're passing in on that other proc for making an entity that's low into high frequency. But for making it a high entity, low frequency, we just grab it off of the low entity. Okay, I can follow that. And then here, that entity that we're passing in, right, because if these two are equal, and then we try and point the one that we're deleting at the last one, oh, why is this a problem? Do you even need to do this? Because of this low entity index, even with just these two different frequencies that we're dealing with, this is complicated enough that I'm not fully understanding this assignment here. Like, I can appreciate we're saying, okay, so the entity at the end of the list, okay, so this is what he said with swapping the one that's at the end of the list to point at the high index that we were just, we're saying that its position in the high entity list is now pointed where this old one was pointing at. Is that right? Yeah, because we get this one out. Yeah, I feel like, because this is a reference to that, so shouldn't I just be able to do, oh no, because we have to get this out of the high entity list first. Okay. Yeah, we're getting at the very last. Okay, now I get it. Now I get it. So we grab that last one out of the end of the high entity list to be able to get its low entity index, and then we can say, then we fetch it out of the low entities and we say, this is where your new high entity index is. Okay. He'll probably explain that a little bit more here, but just trying to make sure that I don't, if I try to understand it, again, I'll keep harping on this point for as long as I continue to bother doing this stream. If I try and understand this for myself before letting him hand feed me the information, then I'll actually understand it. I have to actually work against, you know, my lack of understanding, rather than, because if he just says it at me, if he's just talking at me and I don't try to figure this out, then the code will work and the game will do what it's supposed to do, but I'll never be able to internalize the problem that we're solving by doing things this way.
High entity, right? Because it's become low frequency. So I think that's right. We'll have to step through that once to make sure I didn't typo anything up there. All right, so the get entity call, I think the get entity call, I don't even really know if we're going to have a get entity call anymore, to be completely honest with you. So we'll see who's actually using it. I'm not entirely certain. So yeah, I think get entity is basically just going to be, get entity is just going to be a thing about getting low entities. I think that's really all there is to it for the most part. Hard to say. Hard to say, indeed. So let's think about this for a second. But yeah, I think we really just don't care about that. So I think this is going to be, I think this is just going to be get low entity potentially. I think that's really all we're going to have. And I think you're not going to really do a get high entity call. I mean, I guess I could just apply both of them. And they are assumed to return like 0 if they don't exist. So it'd be something like, you know, low entity star result equals 0, assuming that the result is between the 0, you know, the first valid entity and the last valid entity, then we'll go ahead and return it. Otherwise, we return null. So I'm gonna say that that's how this works. Yeah. So basically, yeah. I like that. All right. So let's go ahead and do that. So that's just low index plus low index. That's how we get that result. We don't care about any of this stuff. That's not gonna happen anymore.
So I like getting rid of the whole residence concept because it really just muddies the waters a bit for me, and I never fully understood what I couldn't get a sense for where that is impacting the flow of pulling things out of dormancy or vice versa, you know, storing them to be dormant. That never fully clicked for me. And it's always a good feeling to delete a bunch of code. So all of that, yeah, so instead of fetching these out of these lists and then storing them in this result, right, we know where the high entity is because it's just going to be stored on the low entity, or the index to it anyway. So we say that this is going to be, yeah, GameState.lowEntities at low index. And this is off of the low entity count now. And this should be a low index. Looks good.
So that result goes there. And then we will go ahead and put those right here for now, and low becomes high. So that does that. And low index, I guess we could just do, make that just be called the index. So those are...
Just back that out. Whoops. Because it does seem kind of purposeless. What have I done wrong here? Just replace that with nothing. There we go. Oh, no. I wanted that to be... Yeah, whoops. So that looks like that. And then... this can be the low, and this can be the high. And this also needs to return a high entity. Cool.
Symmetric. Sometimes it's nice to have them be symmetric. Okay, good. All right, so I think that should just about do it. So if we're going to add an entity, that now means that we're always adding a low entity, right? Entities are just, you know, they're just going to be low. And let's go ahead and assert here that the low entity count is less than the low entity array size. We will go ahead and initialize that entity. So we'll do it like so.
I don't think we need to do that, right? Because we still have bounds checking on... We have it on fixed arrays and slices, so it just seems... Yeah, same thing. So we don't need that. And this will be incrementing the low entity count. And it'll be... The entity index will be off of the low entity count. And so this, we don't need to care about residence anymore. We might just be good here.
There we go. And that will be it. And we don't have to change anything else. These guys basically add low entities, and I feel like with the entity index, these guys don't really need it anymore, I think, most of the time, because now entity index, and this is kind of nice, doesn't really mean anything to people. They don't need to know an entity's index anymore. It's not really important. In fact, to some degree, well, no, I guess you kind of still do need to know the entity index when you're doing that front and back pointer thing. So all right. So anyway, so these are always low entities that we're getting here, and this is get low entity.
I wonder if it makes sense to do it this way or just do it the way he's doing it. I don't know that I really care, to be honest. So, yeah, we just come in here and update all these calls.
And there we go. So that's that. I think there's a little inefficiency baked into that, unfortunately. I feel like maybe we want to be returning pointers in some of these cases, but that's okay. No big deal. So let's see. Add entity. Add entity. It's add low entity now, so there we go.
What was he just changing? I thought I was watching him change. Oh, he was changing the add player call. I think I can just probably work through this on my lonesome here real quick. So that just looks like that, I think. And that's good. Yeah, that's done. And we do the same thing for player. Not quite sure. What did he do with the residence stuff on that? I guess he just hasn't gotten that far, so I won't. I think we can just get rid of that. Well, actually, this would be make entity high frequency, right? I think we still need that. We're not passing in that or that. Actually, we do need the type. But this needs to be add low entity, right? Or is it make? No. Get low entity. Whoops. There we go. And same thing here. Yeah, well, we get the low entity out of this. I'll see if I can kind of preempt where he's going to go with this, but we don't do that. We still get the low entity out, and we're just going to see if the high index, I'm guessing, is 0. Right? Because there's always going to be a low entity there. Even if this is set to 0. If it's set to 0, it'll come back and it'll be nothing. So I think this is actually what this is going to look like when we're done. How close are we to building? We still got all of these entity residence checks here, which I think it's all just going to come down to checking the high index on the low entity, but I don't want to jump too far ahead and make all of the wrong choices, so we'll let Casey catch up here. How am I doing on time? We're looking okay. We're looking okay.
Add entity. It's add low entity now, so there we go. Add low entity. And low, so this is just like that. I guess I could also do this, like so. Okay. And you can see that I'm, this is the kind of thing that I do a lot.
I didn't catch that he renamed that to add low entity. So everywhere we're calling that, you gotta update that. Okay.
I oftentimes write code multiple times. I'll just go through it several passes. You can see it doesn't take me that long. I'll spend a few times doing it. Put things in, remove things, pull them out. It's like this is definitely the part where you're like shaping the clay and seeing what the maquette looks like right before you decide to sculpt the finished piece. You just got to be willing to kind of go over things multiple times and like get them until you're pretty confident. And you need to do that actual work in there of trying different stuff until you get it until it feels good. And that's really important. So I don't mind like the fact that we write and rewrite a lot of these things multiple times. Because like I said, as long as you keep those rewrites fast, they don't cost you anything, and they end up producing a much more high quality result at the end. All right, so now if we're adding a player, again, we don't care about any of this stuff at all. So what we need to do here is just take a look at...
Whoops, so I would have thought maybe we do need to make the player. Well, I'll just let him finish. Let him finish.
This camera following entity index, assuming that equals 0, then we'll set it to equal to our entity index, which is fine. Let's see what else we got here. So now we're going to do, these are loops solely over the high entity index, right? And so this is just going to...
I guess maybe we don't need to do this. That is, make the player high frequency after we've added them, because that'll happen anyways in the... well, I don't want to think too hard about this. I don't have time.
Full on get those directly, high entities. This is just a nice straight loop, because this is, we're going to have to start making this sort of code is going to have to start being performant. So how did we get to here exactly? We have a move player.
Okay, so we're jumping in here for entities. Yeah, how did he do that? Okay, we're checking, that makes sense. We're checking the high entities. And to get it, all we have to do is grab it out of that list, right? And what do you do over here? Probably just this.
Performant. So,
and that needs to be a pointer. What? Where is this entity? Oh, it should be off of the index, right? Yeah, he hasn't changed that. He hasn't changed that yet. He's going to have to, but I'm guessing we'll just compare. I feel like this should be like this, and it should be if entity.high, well, basically we want to check to see if its high index is equal, because then they would be equivalent. Or, no, wait a minute, what am I thinking? I think if we just took the address of that. Oh, but we can't do that because that is a procedure parameter. Yeah, we'll just see how Casey handles it, and then, because I don't want to start going and changing that parameter to a pointer if that's not necessary, because it'll just be more unnecessary work in the end.
How did we get to here exactly? We have a move player. So we need to pass, I suppose, a high entity here, right? Because only high entities can move, right? We only have this.
And he is going to make it a pointer, so I think that just kind of answers my question right there.
This function only works with high entities. So we go ahead and do that here, I think. Well, you know, let's think about this. So I'm trying to decide whether I want that low-high pointer thing, where they're bundled, because I had that, right? I'm trying to think about whether I want that. Like, do I want to keep using that or not? And, you know, maybe I do. So maybe I do want that to still work for the most part. And this would just have in it the low index, right? Because you know you can always get the low index if you have a high, and you know you can always get the high index if you have a low, but you might...
Okay, so that'll fix that, actually. If we have the low index, then that's all we need to actually be able to tell whether, you know, the entity we're dealing with in the high frequency is the same or not.
Might not have a high, so you might not have the low index. So that's really the only thing that we need there. So we'll see. We'll see. Anyway, so I'm not sure if I actually want to keep this or not. We'll see, or whether I still want accessors on it or not. But what I do need to do is be able to compare these two. So I want to do is say this right here is the high entity index. This is basically the test high entity index. So we're just looping over those high entities to test to see if they're there. So we're going to go ahead and grab basically a high entity test.
Getting some pretty long names here. Do I want to say like just test high index? I think that's what I'm going to do. Because if I see high, I know I'm dealing with an entity probably. And that's good enough for me. So then we get this out. And we say if the test high entity is, how come I have, what happened to my indentation here? Something got messed up. Like this should be, maybe we just introduce this new, yeah, no, I don't understand why this happened. Why do I have two? My son's trying to break into the office. I thought he was asleep by now, but things must be going terribly wrong outside. Make sure I have no urgent messages on my phone. Oh, whoops. Never mind. I think that's my wife. I assumed it was my son. Hold on. All right, sorry about that. I forgot that she said she was going to bring me tea, but I still have the kettlebell in front of the door to stop my son from breaking in. Because, and now he is asleep. I was right when I thought it should be his nap time, and it is. I just got confused. You never quite know what's going on the other side of the door. It could be chaos out there. It could be serenity. You just never know quite what to expect. But I didn't hear any screaming, and that's always a good sign. Okay, so yeah, I just don't understand why my indentation looks like this. I guess we're introducing this, and this was never... I must have missed it where Casey just kind of shoved that code over. So let's just carry on. So we're going to test to see if that test high entity that we're getting out, that we want to test against the entity we're passing in. Okay, yeah, this is still that entity struct, right? Yeah, that bundling. We kept that around, but we got rid of the residence component of it. So I just got a little bit confused. And yeah, this is just gonna be this, I think. Oh, we're gonna have to get the low entity out of that. So I think that this is good the way it is for now.
High entity, like so. We're going to go ahead and grab that out. And we know we can get the low if we need it, but we're just not going to get it right now. So then we go ahead and say, all right, and in fact, I guess we don't even need to do that quite yet. What we could do first is say, if the entity index that we're talking about here, if that test high index is not equal to us, right? So this is whatever we are. So this is entity.high, whatever our actual index is. So I guess it's actually entity low, high entity index. So if the two indices differ, then that's how we know that we need to check, because that means it's not us. So because we don't collide against ourselves. So then we go ahead and grab that test high entity, and I guess we also need to grab the one to see if it collides or not. We could loft that up.
Okay, so now this looks right again. I think it was just I moved this out because I think he was moving that out, and that was kind of messing with my understanding of how this was laid out originally. So then we get that out, and then yeah, we still need to get the low entity out, because we don't have that.
So that we wouldn't have to pull the low entity for every single person, but we might end up just doing that in a different way. Like we'll only enter people into the grid if they collide or something like this, right? Yeah, so test high entity, we've got its low entity index, like so. And I don't remember, when we did make entity high frequency, did we remember to put that in there? No, we didn't. So entity high, low entity index should always be equal to whoever created him, right? Yeah.
So I missed that. I think there was some initialization code that got updated, but I think at this point the rest of this will just kind of conform, right? Like that. And then we just use whichever dimension of the entity that we need to use for that particular thing. Now the hit entity index is going to be the low index, is that right? So it would be high.low entity index. I don't want to make all those changes and just assume. Whoops. Test high. I think that's what that should look like, but let's go ahead and make sure we make that same update. And it's in here when making the entity high frequency that this high entity that we're now getting out needs to have its low entity index set. Yeah. Okay.
Should always be equal to whoever created him, right? Yeah. So that's that. Let's see here. Low entities. It doesn't have an underscore yet. So we have test low entity. Don't know why I renamed it that way. I should just call it test entity low to keep it symmetric. Test entity high. There we go. And I guess I could wrap these guys into an actual low and high if I wanted to. All right, let's go ahead and do that. So if I do the entity structure, because I'm trying to figure out whether or not I want this to happen, right? Test entity low index equals entity, excuse me, equals test entity high, test entity low. So
okay. And I do feel like that's probably the saner thing to do. It's just annoying because when I instantiate this, I want it to be in one declaration like this instead of a declaration followed by assignments, multiple assignments, but we just cannot do anything to help that. Just a dumb OCD thing anyways. Doesn't actually get us anything. So high and low, and the low entity index is going to be this, right? And that equals that. And that equals that. Guess this is not low entity index, just low index. Okay, so then the rest of this actually wouldn't change the way that I was changing it. We would have test entity.low, test entity.high, and then this is nice because we can just say test entity.low index. All right, this should actually be this, right? All right, right on the line. We've got like one, yeah, we literally don't have a single other character to spare, or we'd have to split that up. Thank goodness.
So there's my high, there's my low, and the low index I have to get off of the high, right? So it's actually this guy, and I could do it that way if I want to, like so. All right. So that produces the test entity. And now I can finish the rest of this routine, which probably would just work because it's already set up to work that way. When we do the hit entity index should presumably, well, what do we actually need that for at the end? We just need to see what...
I guess this is probably better. We can actually just do this way like he did it. Yeah.
Whether we need to do anything to it, right? Yeah, so we just need to see whether it wants to go like up or down or those sorts of things, right? And so we probably just want to, we could save the pointers there if we want, or we could just save the high index. I'm not sure which one. Or we could save the low index for that matter. So let's go ahead and say hit high entity index for now. So what we'll do is we'll say hit high entity index equals test high entity index, and we'll do that in all the places where we needed to actually remember who we hit. There we go. So in the place where we remembered who we hit, we now can say, all right, hit high entity index this guy. So if I want to grab his stuff out, we can go ahead and say there's the high entity, right? And this is the hit high, and that is get high entity. I don't actually do that. I guess I know this is always full. Game state high entity index. Yeah, so I almost want like a direct one that does an assertion to make sure I'm not referencing outside of anything, but that doesn't do the bounds checking so it would compile out. So I'll have to think about that one later. I'll have to think about that one later as well. All right, so that would be that, and hit low would be like this, right? And it looks like we only need the hit low for this guy, so probably we could have just saved that. Maybe it was a mistake to save the high instead. Let's see, go. And that's low. All right, so those are done, and now we need to loop over our high entities, and that's totally fine. Probably we could have just... All right, so those are done, and now we need to loop over our high entities, and that's totally fine. We don't need to check our high entities because we know that everything that's in the high array now is high properly. We are doing all the same stuff that we were doing before, but now what we want to do is we want to be able to, so this is a little bit tricky. This will actually change people's residences in this loop directly. And what I'm thinking is, I wonder, is this the place where we would always do it, right, is when they come out here? Because if it was, we could actually bake this right in here, and I'm kind of thinking maybe that is what I do want to do. Essentially, the only place that you can have it happen is here. And the reason for that is it makes the iteration not tricky, right? It means that the iteration is pretty easy for us to handle, and we don't have to deal with it in any other way. So basically what we do here is we'd say we're looping over these guys, right? We're checking them, and if they're not inside the rectangle, then we go ahead and we pull them out. We pull them out.
Muted again. I don't even understand when I last muted myself. I'm sorry about that. Jeez. Now I'm like worried because I'm running low on time. I don't know if I'm going to be able to finish this at this point. I don't know what happened. I was making really good time, and then I just fell behind, and I never got caught back up again. So, the issue that he's talking about here in this set camera business is, rather than doing this where we make the entity low in a separate call, he's just going to bake this in to the set camera call, so that as the camera's moving, whenever it gets set to some new position, it will just be it'll bring in those entities, or rather it'll tag them out, mark them as inactive as we go to wherever we set the camera to where we want it to be, which kind of makes sense. Like, I'm trying to think of any reason why you wouldn't want to do that as he's moving through these changes, and I can't think of it. Like, what purpose would it serve? Any reason why you'd want to update entities that are local or not local to the camera? I guess it could be like an issue where if you had like a teleport functionality and you all of a sudden wanted to make a bunch of entities active, but they hadn't been polled frequently enough to update their state to some place that you wanted them to be in. Something like that. I don't know. Probably not worth thinking too much about that right now, though.
By doing that swap that I was talking about, and we just don't increment the pointer. So the person that we swap into place, we just don't increment the pointer. So I'm thinking that it looks something like this, right? So we've got the high entity count. We loop over everyone there. We check to see if they're in the rectangle. If they're not in the rectangle, then we grab their entity low by just looking at the high entity's low entity index. So we've got it now. We already know the high index, right? It's this. So we just say this is our high index, like so. For that. So that's just a nice loop, very, very straightforward. We check the rectangle. This is the not very frequently. This won't happen presumably very frequently. Oh, well, it might, because I guess we don't set camera that often. But so we take a look to see if the high entity index, you know, I take it back. There is one other case we have to handle. When somebody walks out of bounds, we will have to handle this. So maybe I just want these two routines to be like aware of each other so that the iteration is still easy. Because what I'm worried about is that iteration, this mutates the array, right? So the iteration...
That's a really good point. I feel like, especially considering that a long time ago, probably like 6 months now ago, I actually, you know, watched him do this work, and he had that realization, and that's a pretty big deal. If you're giving every entity agency to do its own thing and update its own state inside of that apron, if it just walks off of that apron, you know, outside of, and the camera has not been reset, right? The entity state is updating. So there's no, you would want to have access to that functionality to make the entity low frequency once it walks outside of the camera bounds. Or they're not really the camera bounds, they're the bounds of the camera's apron, is the way to put it.
If it was just a naive iteration, would fail to work properly, right? So it's just something to think about. That's all. So yeah, so basically, like, let's say I call this here is all I'm saying, right? So this mutates the array, and so we wouldn't want to increment the entity index, but that assumes that we know, right? So it's basically, if it's in if it's in the rectangle, skip it. If it's not in the rectangle, get rid of it, right? But that assumes that we kind of know exactly how that removal function is working. And it's kind of, I don't like, you know, having that be so implicit in the code necessarily. It would be nice if there was a way to kind of avoid that a little bit, right? And so, I don't know, like, maybe the best thing to do there would be to kind of like,
where did this entity... Oh, we cannot assign to that. So how would we do that? Could we make it addressable? Is that right? The index, what is this saying? Cannot be made addressable. I'm guessing that's just because it's for in range. So we probably got to do this like, you know, C-style for loop here. That's probably what we got to do. Well, do we though?
Sort of pair these guys together, right? Say, you know, make entities low frequency by area, right? And that does this loop, right? But it does the loop right here, and yeah, just so I guess offset and check frequency by area. There we go. And so we'll call that function, and these will kind of be coupled with the previous function so that they're in the same place in the code, and they make a little more sense, right? And so this will just pass what that entity offset is, right? So that's the offset there. And let's see, offset check frequency by area, entity offset frame, like so.
Well, I did not see that coming either. Offset and check frequency by area. We'll pass that in. And then where does he throw that in? Looks like right over here. So offset and check frequency by area. So it has to take the offset, like you said, and it's also going to have to take the game state. Just how much time do I have left? Like just barely enough to maybe where we could, assuming it doesn't go too far into the Q&A. I think it's still remotely possible that I can wrap this day up on stream. And we don't have an entity index. Oh, wait. Yeah, so we got to take that out, and then we're going to have to pass in the camera bounds. We're going to have to pass in... this is actually just going to be offset. Okay.
So this right here is what my offset's going to be, and this is the thing that I need to pass for the bounds for checking. So that's going to be camera bounds, and so we'll just do that, and that can still be, you know, that could be an inline, so it just still sticks it in there, but just so it's, you know, clear what's going on in these guys, right? Most of these could really be inline for the most part. Well, this one might stay out. All right. So I think that is how I would like to do that.
He still didn't pass in the game state, but that's okay. We can just assume that we're correct in knowing that he's going to have to pass it in. How else can he iterate over the entities if he doesn't have the state? And what was this? Just camera bounds. Okay, so that leaves this, which I don't know if he's going to pull that out too, but I guess I just don't understand why we skip over and add one in here. Where did, yeah, so in here, we get the high entity out, and then we increase the offset. We ask if that is in the rectangle. Like, why do we want to skip over, why would we want to skip over the next high entity anyways? Because then we wouldn't be checking that next high entity.
So everyone who's inside the rectangle gets skipped. Everyone who's not just gets deleted from the high entity array. And then this has to be over the high entity count. So, and that's much better.
Okay, he wasn't quite finished. Which explains a bit of my confusion, but so he's changed the loop so that he's not incrementing the entity index. But well, he's not incrementing it inside of the loop. He's incrementing it here. But if you do this, I guess okay, so I think I get it. It's because inside of this make low entity or make entity low frequency call, when we do this, we're decrementing the count, and so we want to stay on that index. Right? I think that's right. Yeah. Okay. Well, I wonder if, like, can we actually define this that way? If we do this, if we set this to behave like this, can we just do that? That works. Okay. Easy enough.
Going over the low entities, it's the same thing, only now instead of doing changes to residence, we're calling make entity high frequency, right? And that is that. And I think that's really all we need to do, oops, about that. So we do need to do this and say we're not going to try to move anyone if their high entity index is already set, because we know that they already have a high entity, right? So this is only if their high entity is set to 0. And then, oops, I passed the game state. Is set to.
So what did he do here? For entity index, starting from the bottom of the low entities, get the low entity out. Okay, so this check just happens after we fetch it out. And we check to see if there is one. If there is a high entity index, once again, the 0 value proves nice and useful, and then this will make that low entity active or high frequency.
0. And then, oops, I passed the game state. There we go.
And then he sees he has to pass in the game state. I guess I could take a look at my own errors here and see if I can work through them on my own. What is that? What is that? Oh. This is down here. Well, I'll just wait for him to get there, I guess.
And then we need to reserve our 0th entity in both places. So we do need to do a add entity, and we need to do a basically a reserve a slot in the high entities. So high entity count equals 1 as well, so that basically we never get below that 1, because the high entity index of 0 has to be reserved for the null entity. So what else we got to do here? For controlling entities, so an entity that you're controlling.
Okay, so now he's getting down into the input stuff. This is just that. So we skip over that first, I guess. I see. So it's reserving the first low and high entity is all that's doing.
So what else we got to do here? For controlling entities, so an entity that you're controlling. We do want that to always be high. So I'm trying to think, though, exactly whether we want, how exactly we want to do that, because it's basically this move player function that ends up wanting to do that. So I'm not sure exactly how we want to handle this. So what we want to do, I guess, is we want to first say whatever the player index was for controller, let's check to see what that is, right? So we've got low index for the player, right, is coming out of this thing. And so what we want to do is say if the low index is not equal to 0, or yeah, I guess we could change the sense of this and say if it is equal to 0, right? So assuming that it's equal to 0, that means that we are checking to see whether or not this controller is going to start controlling a player, right? And that would do this. So we'll say ended down, and the index equals add player. So we're going to add the player, game state player underscore controller, empty index. That all looks good. No weirdness there. And then in the case where we aren't, then we're going to...
Hold on here. So if we don't have a player index for this controller, and that controller is now pressing start. Okay, this right here is what he pulled out. Right, and then the controlling entity business is still sitting out here. And actually this should be like that, which is much nicer. What does that get? Low entity? Yeah. Okay. So if we have that, we do that, and that's all the same, but this should be, well, yeah, no, that's the same.
Do the move, and the move does require that the player be in high. So this is one case where we would have to say, you know, make sure that the entity is actually a high entity. So
okay, so this is just going to go away, I think, and then this is what happens here now. Well, I guess this if player is connected business should be happening, or if controller is connected business should be happening outside of all of this. Because otherwise there's no point in setting any of this, probably. No, we can get rid of that. What's going on here? I have messed up this indentation. What loop are we closing there? Yeah, we just have an extra brace. Okay. And then this actually needs to happen here, maybe? That looks right.
I don't know if I want to still do the thing. I guess if I just have a get high entity that forces entities to high, that would do it. And it looks like, I'm trying to think of whether this guy even cares that much. It looks like this guy does also use the high. So yeah, so I feel like what it's looking like to me is what I want to do is have is maybe have entity. Maybe when you call get high entity, that is the thing that returns an entity struct that has both pairs and the index in it. That seems to make some sense to me because that's looking like the usage pattern, right? That's the time when you actually do that operation. So I think maybe that's the right way, right? Yeah. So in this case, when we add it, it's totally fine. We don't need to turn him to high. But when we actually move him, we would need to turn him to high. And so that's the controlling entity equals get high entity, right? And so when you call the get, it's a little bit weird to call it get high entity because you're actually passing a low index to it, right? But it seems like you never really get an entity by its high index. That's really just something that you use when you're looping over them in processing. So it's hard to say. It's hard to say how I want to do that exactly. So we'll think about it some more. But that's basically what that would do. So get high entity would actually look like this. You would pass a low index, right? And the way this would work is you'd have a result. You would first do a make entity high frequency, like so, right? You would always do that on the guy when you call high. And you would then, in fact, the other thing you could do is say that make high frequency could return the high frequency pointer, although in the case where one already exists, Maybe you don't necessarily want to. Hard to say. But we could say that this works like this, right? We could say that if it already has one, we just return it, right? So we've got high entity, entity high equals 0.
Jumping around a bunch here at the end. Oh man, hopefully I can manage this. I'm gonna give myself 10 more minutes, and if I can't wrap up by then I gotta bail. How much is left? There's exactly 10 minutes left. Yeah, there's no way. There's no way. There's no time. It wasn't meant to be. So a high entity is a high entity pointer, and if we get a high entity index greater than 0 here, then come on now. Ugh. We will.
So in this case, we do entity high equals this. Right. So there we go. And we would do that here as well. But in this case, it'd be entity low high entity index. Okay.
Okay, so instead of getting that high index out, it just comes off of the low. Right. And we don't need to declare it, we just assign it.
So if we have a high index already, we just get it. If we didn't have one, then we make sure we create it like that, like so, and then we return the entity high. And that way, in here, all I have to do is say, okay, the result is going to have the low index. It's going to have the low entity, which is just whatever.
Forgot to make a high entity come back from this. There we go. And then the get high entity call over here. We just assign this stuff. As we get it out. Well, this is actually a regular entity coming back, bundling all of these things. Low entities, index, that's a pointer. Okay, yeah, that's what that confusion was about. I saw a low entity index and I was expecting, or I saw low index and I was expecting low entity index.
The game state, low entities plus the low indexes. 5-minute warning. Man, so close and yet so far too. And then it's also going to have the high entity. So there we go. So we grab those. That's.
And then that comes out of this call. Yeah, because that's what we just, that's the change we just made. So result.high equals that. And so this is just going to go away.
It's all good. And I guess I'll allow it so that when you call get high entity, we will allow it where you can call it with something that would be out of bounds, and it will just it will silently fail on that. So
okay.
Maybe I just want this to be an assertion. Maybe that's the right thing to do. Because it seems like you should never be getting a high entity that way, but we could change it later to say that you can pass a 0 here and get 0 back, right? Get a 0 pointer back. I don't know which one we want to do about that. I really don't know. So we'll find out.
So this becomes an assertion instead. Wish I had more time to kind of sit with this, but we're really close and I just want to wrap it up. Maybe tomorrow. If there's anything interesting to reflect on, I'll kind of do a preamble about it.
To do. Should we allow passing a 0 index and return a null pointer? Maybe. Who knows? Okay. So, let's see here. Let's see. So when we were looping over the test entities, you got to get the low. Yeah, that was a little bit janky. I didn't love that. All right, so get high entity. So the controlling entity, we pass that. Gets the high entity, that's fine. This gets the high entity as well. And this could just basically look to see whether it has a high pointer. Assuming it does, it goes ahead and uses it. Let's see, the low index has to be between those bounds. This is going to loop over the high entities only, right?
Where did that camera stuff go? Camera following entity, get high entity. This is just going to ask if...
whether it has a high pointer. Assuming it does, it goes ahead and uses it.
Oh, okay, so that's just nil. Right. Or if it's not nil, then that just works. Oh, that's neat. Yeah, that's really good.
Let's see, the low index has to be between those bounds. This is going to loop over the high entities only, right? Because it doesn't actually need the low for anything. Sorry, it always needs the high. And so that is pretty much it for that. This is the high entity index here, like so. There we go, high entities plus high entity index. And then our low entity is just going to be gotten from the high entity itself. So high entity dot low entity index. Okay.
So that is just gone. And we can pull all of this over. And then instead of this being off of the entity index, that's the high index, and then this is the high, yeah, we'll just call that high entity for now. And access that way.
And that's it, right? So there we go. Now,
is that really it? That's right. I saw one other error. Wow, we might actually be there. Controlling entity. What does this take? Takes a regular entity, and what is this? It's a pointer. So can I just dereference it? Is that all we need to do? We'll see. We'll see if his blows up and mine blows up. Yeah. That's too damn bad. Assert this index is greater than 0 and less than or equal to the high entity count. Yeah, so we must be passing in 0, is that right? Let's see if his works.
I'm sure that's going to crash horribly because I did so many random things there. That's way too many to have not made some mistakes. But that's basically what I want to do. And I think I want to do one more pass over it because I feel like I want to clean up that entity handling there.
Yay, he has the same bug.
So let's see. All right, so this guy needs to check. So that would be a case where it would argue for the thing that I said where it should just check the bounds to see. And so I don't know, like let's do it because it looked like that was sort of something I had wanted to type in. So we'll let it happen. We'll see if it's good or not. All right, so we are not working properly there. We did not properly create our other high entities there. Why did we not create that? Why did we not handle them? Oh, we still haven't done our wrapping yet. So we still have not fixed the wrapping problem. If you remember correctly, this thing here is not correct yet. Which is, yeah, we don't have time probably to do that stuff today. But let's just take a look. Let's see if that, no? Did I do that right? Still not testing it? I thought that would have been good enough to fix it, but it might have been a different problem because we still, if you remember correctly, we still have the problem here of making entities high frequency. When we're doing the checks, we don't support the wrapping properly because we said we weren't going to support wrapping, and this would actually fail in wrapping. But I do not actually know why we didn't.
Let's see if mine will actually work the same as his. I assume it will. Nope. Oh darn. That is so sad. Something is clearly busted after all that work, and I don't really have any time to debug it.
Get the entities when I fix that problem. I also looks like he's not in the right position when he moves there. So we've got some stuff we got to deal with here. So let's go ahead and start our debugging pass. Probably won't finish it, but we're compiling now, so that's fine, and we can finish it tomorrow.
I wish that this was giving me a more useful error. Wait, what? Oh, that was weird. Well, something in there. I have no idea because the last time we were running properly was quite a while ago, and I wouldn't even know where to begin. I guess what we could do is like say, just do trust our handy print debugging skills. Can we move the player? Well, there's no player yet, so that's actually, yeah. Can we get here where we check to see if we have, like, I want to see it just generally if I can get a sense for where to start looking. And that makes sense. There's no, it's going to be over here, I bet. If something is wrong. Oh, it's somewhere before this. What? We can't be getting into... Well, when we get high entity here... What is that doing? It kind of seems like we're getting a high entity back. Like, do we enter into here? We don't. Okay, so that's not the issue. I guess I could just print that out and make sure that that's... not getting anything back, but like there's nothing else here that would make us fail in between those calls. What is going on? Yeah, so we print out nil. Drawing the bitmap is failing? Drawing the bitmap fails? No. Oh, because this is returning just nothing. Oh. So we need to check if this whole thing is nil. Is it that simple? Hey, Skytrius. Yeah, we did wind up using the enum array. And it looks like we're working. Kind of. Well, that's sad. We go to move the player, and so something is very wrong there. Shoot. Man, I wish I had more time. I really wish I had more time. But I gotta go. But yeah, we did use the... enum array in place of those using usages, I guess you could say. So now we just access our buttons like so. And I like that it's a lot more clear, you know, when I'm looking at the way that controller input type is laid out. It just seems a lot more obvious what is going on. We have our button enums, and they all map to individual button states, so we can treat it as an array and as kind of like a, you know, more like a dictionary or a map as well to get at those different button states. And the syntax is very nice. Like, that's just pretty... It feels like I'm accessing a dictionary, even though, you know, I know that's not really what it is, right? It's just mapping those indices for each enum into the indices of the array, right? So, pretty cool. Dang, I wish... Well, maybe I'll check this really quick and see if we can get the player spawning. I'd like to at least get to the place where Casey is, even though, you know, the walls aren't spawning in. So if we go into here, And this just feels wrong. I feel like we're dereferencing something that we shouldn't be dereferencing here. Well, this is getting us back a bundled entity. So actually, this is... Okay, I think I know what the issue is here. Controlling entity dot high, right? No. Well, that's not right, and that can't be right because this takes the bundled entity. We can't move. We can't do anything. We try to spawn in and we blow up. Why does that happen? Maybe it's just a really simple change inside of the move player code. Ah, so it's up here somewhere. I wonder if this high entity is nil, actually. That's probably what's going on. Oh, what? Oh, we call it up here too. Betting is going to show me that there's a nil entity, which means the player is not being made high frequency. Say what? This result is coming back totally nil. Okay, so we're just not adding the player correctly. So I gotta, this is to do. Look at, fix the add player code. Because when we come back around and we try to get this out, I mean, it doesn't make sense because if we are getting a low index that is greater than 0, then it should, the entity should exist. But that's what I get for rushing. You know, whatever, and also just being so time crunched. I shouldn't have dilly-dallied earlier. Probably would have not been rushing and I would have gotten this working. But I'm sure whatever it is, it's pretty simple, and I'll come back tomorrow and just kind of explain. But I know Casey fixes this other bug where the walls weren't being made active once the player, or not, they weren't being made active until the player was created. And I'll try to make sure I get a good understanding of that, and then we'll dive in and make sure that, you know, all of that is copacetic, as it were, and then we'll keep moving forward. But yeah, just a really code-heavy week this week, but it's been good. It's putting the pressure on me to just move faster so that I actually have time to complete each day. But we got pretty close to the end. We got to the Q&A. I guess we can really quickly...
In fact, it won't be long, right? Because it's tonight, Thursday, so it's actually a morning tomorrow, so it'll still be fresh in our heads.
See what Casey finds here, because I think... Let's see here. No, looks like he's going to pour through it for a few more minutes. So I'll just summarize what happens in tomorrow's stream. Yeah, sorry, Skytree said, I thought your chat was broken on your scene. No, I just haven't had chat enabled on the editor. Where is this? Maybe I should. I'm leery of making the actual code scene too busy. I do have the chat up on Casey's end when we're watching Casey, but I haven't had it up on my end because there's already, you know, so little room for code in the editor. Like, I guess I could do this. I don't think it matters too much, but I could do some... Oh, shoot. Locked my computer out. Whoops. You could do something like this, right? So that, like, the legible code is not being... but then, you know, the code looks unintelligible anyways, right? Like, I'd have to... What would I have to do? I'd have to, like... how to do this? I just have to have my editor split up. And now I'm working with even less real estate. I've thought about that because, you know, it would be easier for me to engage with the chat if I saw it up here on my scene, but I also have it in this other tab over here. So anyways, thanks for stopping by. Thanks to everybody who came out and saw me struggle this stream. It was, like I said, pretty code heavy, but we'll be back tomorrow to hopefully wrap up the week nicely and just be done with this entity stuff, because it's pretty, I don't know, it's not the most fun thing to think about. Like for me, the things that get me excited, really excited, are thinking about and talking about and working on the graphics code for the, you know, doing the software render, and then once we get into the GPU stuff, that's what I'm most looking forward to. But I also want to have a really solid understanding of, you know, how to build an entity system correctly, because like the most exposure I've had to it before Handmade Hero was like reading about entity component systems, which everybody, like a lot of people, are excited about. And despite how much time I've spent reading about those, I still don't quite get it. Because again, I just don't feel like I'm smart enough to use like a Rust and Bevy and everything's an ECS type of approach. But maybe that's not the best approach anyway. Who knows? So yeah, I'll be back tomorrow and we'll pick up where we left off and kick off day 55. So thanks for joining me for day 54, and I'll see you later.